the platforms that we use encourage us to measure how we spend money, especially the paid platforms, how we spend money and how they return dollars to us. So they're telling us measure the beginning and the end, not the middle, because they want to prove their value to us. So I think that we're trained by our platforms to think like the accounting team about this instead of like the marketers.
Welcome to AdMind Analytics. My name is Adam Collings. I'm the Director of Marketing. I'm here with Mike Query, our founding engineer. Mike, how are you doing?
Good, Adam. Let's get it.
Let's do it. So today we're here. We're going to talk about customer journey analytics. So in the context of someone who's looking for customer journey analytics, looking for analytics help, what does that mean?
So I think it deserves a little bit of a background. So we've had 20 years ago when we started web analytics, we didn't have many advertising platforms on the web, and our content creation wasn't very sophisticated yet. We didn't even have mobile app and mobile experiences really. And now 20 years later, so we have early web platforms. We have Omniture, and which turned into Adobe, and then Google Analytics that were primarily focused on the web. And then as mobile app experiences started coming to light, then we started having app analytics, the Amplitudes and the Mixpanels of the world. And then now those systems, because the customer journey is taking place across web and app and mobile, because that's starting to become just ubiquitous, now we're talking about the journey in terms of all of those things together. And that's kind of where customer journey analytics comes in, and it's actually in a lot of ways, it's a good reframing for us to reframe the measurement instead of in terms of finances only. We're framing it in terms of the customer and the customer's desired progress.
And so when we say journey, just to level set with everybody, what we're talking about is awareness, consideration, buy, deliver or fulfill, and then advocate. And these being the different stages that a customer is going to go through when they go from I have a pain point, they realize that, all the way through to I've now purchased a product and I either like it or don't, to solve that pain. And so it's this idea that we're going to come up with a way to measure those things.
And it's better. That's a step forward. It's measuring marketing in marketing's terms rather than in finance's terms. It's smart for us to think about that. Now, there are even some tools today that will do customer journey analytics, and that's the way they're titled from the beginning of their existence. In order to make it work, the tool doesn't own the customer journey. You as a marketer and your marketing team own the customer journey. And then you can make most analytics tools facilitate your measurement in terms of the customer journey.
So why does it feel so hard to measure the customer journey to begin with?
Oh, I think one of the reasons is the things that we use for measurement, especially the things that we use for measuring where we put our dollars, are meant to describe their return. They're built to encourage us to spend more dollars. So they try to take credit and show their results in terms of dollars. So you think about logging into Google Ads, like you set conversions up and you're likely recording purchases or trying your very best to do that. Right. And same for Facebook or LinkedIn or anything else. So those tools that are the tools that we use to measure our individual efforts are not very well tuned to measure the progress of the customer journey. They're trying to encourage us to spend more money. And so they're trying to take aggressive credit to show us how many dollars they generate for us.
Yeah. So everything is framed in terms of revenue generated. Totally. Even if you're not using that particular campaign in that platform
for that
to
purpose.
Generate revenue, but they're still trying to give it to you in those terms.
So that's one of the big reasons is that the tools that we use don't encourage us to think about things in terms of the customer journey.
I know in my experience, it's also been a challenge as a marketer, you're not data first. There's no SQL classes that I was taking or learnings that way, but yet I'm still being tasked with trying to connect all these data points from everything that's happening in my ads trafficking platform, everything that's then those traffic clicks are doing on my website, and finding a way as a not skilled data person you end up sort of rigging things together in
To try to
non-best practices way to be able to piece together each of these things. And it goes off the rails really quick. And you end up kind of creating a house of cards that's difficult to maintain and can't adapt to change very well.
Yeah.
So where do SaaS products fit into this landscape? I mean, there's lots. If we Googled it right now, we'd be inundated with customer journey analytics platform, this, that, and the other, and all their feature benefit statements. Yeah. Give us some context.
So, I mean, I think that we kind of hit this already a little bit, that in order to use, there are tools that are built around measuring the customer journey. And it's so confusing. The tech landscape right now is crazy because there's so much innovation. We have all this working customer data platforms, all this change in analytics tools. It can combine all that with the changes in privacy, and we have privacy management tools. And so, and then on the data engineering side, there's an explosion of innovation that's happening there. So it's hard to keep track of all of that stuff. The point is that in order to measure the customer journey, you've got to understand it and document it first. And then you can use the tools, you can bend most of those tools to your will to be able to measure progress along the customer journey. So there's a ton of stuff out there, and it's frankly, it's hard to navigate day to day, week to week.
What have you come across any of your favorite feature statements that these products put out there? And you know, some of we know how difficult it is to actually put the data in a position to leverage those things. But if you're just comparing products and you're kind of hearing the marketing speak, let's assume that it's not as difficult as we know that it is to put all of that stuff together. What are some of the ideal benefits that somebody would get from a fully leveraged system that these tech platforms are sort of promising?
Well, so one of the things that you want to be able to do in your data analysis as you analyze your campaigns, whether those are paid or content campaigns or whatever, when you work on analyzing those things to determine whether they're helping folks understand the value propositions of your product and move closer to you in terms of purchase. What you want to be able to do is to segment people's behavior so that you can say this campaign had this impact versus this campaign B or this other campaign had another set of impact. And then be able to see downstream what that looks like in creating awareness and then in creating consideration, then purchase intent, then purchase and fulfillment, then advocacy. So you want to be able to see how your content and how your campaigns are helping people down that journey. And it's not just looking at the goalposts, the one side or the other. It's not just where did I acquire somebody and then how many dollars were they worth to me. It's about seeing their journey on that path.
I think a lot of, myself included, a lot of marketers, I think if I'm going to get one of these fully leveraged tools, what it's going to tell me is that I'd be making so much more money if there's just this one page, there's this one part of my funnel that's broken or leaking or whatever it is, and that if I can just solve this one thing, conversion rates will quintuple. And I think it's way more nuanced than that. It's not as though, that might have been the case 20 years ago where you just had one or two pages and a button change might have made a huge difference. At this point, the process that the customer can go through and the amount of information they'll have access to across so many different places you can actually publish your content makes it way more nuanced in terms of your reporting and what you're looking for as being effective or not effective in your content. It's not about some page that's broken or some part of your funnel where people are abandoning. It's about understanding what your content is actually, how your content is influencing people as they're in the awareness stage or as they're considering things or as they're about to buy.
I think that's one thing that I've heard you say before is that one of the tricks that we fall into sometimes is assuming that this is a linear process. We talk about it like our funnel, right? Like this step is always followed by this step, is always followed by this step, is always followed by this step. And it's like nobody's consuming content in that linear way. It's like I'm interested in, buying a set of windows or whatever, and I read about 10 different sets of windows, and then I think about it, and then I go look at the different colors, and then I involve, my spouse or something, and it changed. So I'm not traversing that journey in a linear way. Now, in my mind, when I'm making progress, I am going through phases, and those are
milestones.
Yeah, those are sort of linear, but my content consumption is not.
Right. And I think what makes matters worse is when marketers fall victim to this idea that there are certain platforms that are only meant to affect one part of that journey, right?
That's right.
Like Facebook is only for consideration and not for, it's like you kind of get these myopic views of these things. And it's sort of this idea that it's more of intent is greater than platform, not the other. It's not as though Facebook is only going to ever do this one thing, or Pinterest or LinkedIn or whatever it is. It's more about the milestones that people go through internally in their brain as they're moving from, oh, I need blinds. Oh, these ones might work. Oh, let's show my wife this YouTube video. Oh, here's some color examples on Pinterest, and then back on Facebook where you found it originally, now you're seeing like the discount stuff, and it's all part of that journey.
This is one of the things that's a little tricky, because you think about from a data perspective, if we didn't care about privacy or anything like that, we'd say all the world is just one big database, and we can watch every single one of those interactions across all those platforms, and we can build a perfect attribution model that says, here's the exact amount of contribution that one of those specific things did in the path to a purchase. But that's not real. So one of the things you can do is try to approximate it. But another thing that you can do is you can measure the incremental steps in increments rather than saying, what is the contribution to the whole? Like, an easy way to solve that problem is say, what is this contribution to this stage? That's usually a lot easier to measure.
Right.
So it solves some of the data complexity if we can understand and measure things according to our customer journey.
Right. Based on the purpose that you created it for. Okay.
Yeah.
So how do I know if you're, a marketing team, and whether that team is comprised of a CMO and a group, or, the size of the company doesn't matter as much, but if you have a vested interest in the success of marketing, how do I know if I could benefit from an investment in customer journey analytics specifically? Yeah.
So first, like we've said, you can't buy a tool that does customer journey analytics unless you understand your customer journey. You can't build a special report, a dashboard, or like organize your data in some way unless you are already organized in your mind as a marketing team. So the first thing is, have you mapped out your customer journey? And one of the things that we see all the time is, if you were to say, we would ask a marketing team, do you understand your customer journey? And marketers go, yeah, obviously this is what we were trained to do. Okay. Could everybody on your team, if we said, what is awareness to you? Would everybody give us the same answer? And that is like very rarely the case. Most of the time there's a general understanding, but the documentation of this is what equals awareness. These sort of behaviors are what indicate that somebody is becoming aware. That's what it equals for us. That being consistent is super unlikely. So that's the first place to start, is just document that.
Before you go on to the second one, I want to point out, what we're talking about here is that you have awareness, consideration, purchase, acquire, and some sort of advocacy. And then you're asking yourself at each stage of those things, what is my customer thinking, feeling, and wanting as an outcome? Then, what content do I have that is meant to influence what they're thinking, feeling, and wanting as an outcome? And then, what steps can I observe from their actions that will tell me if they are in one of these stages or have moved to another stage? It's the process of, you don't have to have any tech in place. You could do that with a napkin,
right,
and write that stuff down. And
right,
that is what we're talking about. That is the first step.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so once I've got that, what's next?
Well, then I think that you have to have the amount of time to do that work. And then there's kind of some fundamentals there, that if you don't have web analytics set up in the first place, or if you can't tell where your customers are coming to from when they visit your website, like if you don't have your tagging in order in the very first place, then it's pretty hard to start taking a more granular approach to reviewing customer behavior. So you kind of have to have like some of that basic web analytics is set up. We've got tagging set up. We've got event tagging in place. We probably have a data layer. We're probably using a tag management system. And that stuff is moderately reliable. Once you're to that point, then we can start talking about how do we activate the data to make better decisions. When you look at the cost of doing something like this, whether it's dedicated people resources, technology resources, or partner resources that you're bringing in, what's sort of the threshold where you say, I spend this much, therefore, if I allocate this much of that towards analytics, I would expect to see benefits from that? Like if someone's
I mean, I just don't. If someone's spending $10,000 a month in media spend, the cost of putting together something like this is not. They're not going to see the lift. Would be my guess. Like, give me like the
timelines of doing things like this. So if you're talking about not spending an hour or 2 hours to get customer journey analytics functional. I mean, they're talking about projects that are measured in probably hundreds, not thousands, but hundreds of hours of people time or consultant time or whatever. So if those things, if you can project some sort of a cost on that stuff and say, then we're measuring costs in terms of not hundreds of thousands of dollars probably, but tens of thousands of dollars of resource time, whether it's just taking your team and putting their time on it, or whether you're buying extra team bandwidth to do a thing. So the point is, if you have tens of thousands of dollars to invest in an analytics project, then you should be spending, your measurement effort should be proportional to your overall marketing efforts. So if you're not spending tens of thousands of dollars on your marketing, it doesn't make sense to spend tens of thousands of dollars on your measurement of your marketing.
Yeah. So anybody should be able to sit down on the back of a napkin and map out the customer journey and sort of begin to identify some of these things. When we talk about adding in technology, adding in a headcount, or hiring dedicated resources to this, it's sort of the business size is going to determine some of that, along with how much you have in your media budget. And to your point, you're not going to be spending 50% of your media budget learning about analytics stuff. There's going to be sort of kind of a proportional amount that you would allocate to something like this. But that's not to say that somebody who's operating on a lower media spend can't benefit from going through the thought exercise and beginning to piece that together. Yeah. It's just, at what point do I invest in software and people and technology, process? That's the budget question, and it sort of depends on how much in media you have available.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's at risk if I don't approach this right?
Well, so one of the biggest, most obvious ones to me is if you're not measuring the effectiveness of your campaigns based on their intended direct impact. So if a campaign meant to create awareness, if you're not measuring that campaign based on awareness, then you run the risk of one of two things: either saying that campaign's working when it's not working, or saying that campaign is not working when it's actually working and there's a subsequent failure point. So if you're measuring an awareness campaign by purchases and you're not generating purchases, it could be that something else is broken between awareness and consideration intent and intent and purchase. So you might be throwing out winners that are actually winners, and vice versa, doing things that aren't ever working, but you can't prove that they're not working. So you just keep doing them because you're too afraid to press the stop button.
I know for me, in my experience, you also run into this issue where you're in a world where you're fighting for intent terms. Mm-hmm. It's like buy blinds now.
Oh yeah. Sure.
You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like everybody can bid on that because that search volume, the intent behind that is it's I obvious. Want to acquire.
But there's only so many people.
Right. There's a fixed amount of people that are searching for that. And I've had these conversations with executives before where it's like, well, PPC is working out. Let's spend more money there. It's like, we're spending every dollar we possibly can. And you're faced with this sort of now what scenario. And that comes either you're a new company and you're trying to scale and bring a new product to market. You've been there for a while and you're trying to push into growth. But I think if you don't have the customer journey well defined, you're going to run into a cap issue where you can't take it to a new audience. You can't generate demand. You can't generate awareness effectively. You can't
justify it.
Right. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. There's that you want to do a demand generation campaign, but it's not going to turn into dollars immediately. And so keeping a justification of that budget to your stakeholders without a good way to measure it is
I was actually out to lunch with a buddy of mine just recently, and they're having a lot of success throwing money at these new channels, but they can't explain what's happening. And so eventually they're going to run into an issue where they'll need to explain that in order to keep getting the money. Or at the very least, you'd want to know, what is it about what we're doing that is successful so that we can take that into the next new channel and not just be floundering around in the dark, kind of wondering what's working and what's not.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've kind of hinted at this, but let's get a little more specific about what does success look like? What does getting this done right look like?
So I think the first thing is it's done right when you're operating according to the customer journey. So think about when you onboard a new team member, do you tell them what the customer journey is, and do you have it documented? And then once they're onboarded, can they regurgitate what the customer journey is the same as the rest of their other team members? When you onboard a new vendor, when you bring on a new platform, do you describe its function and its purpose in terms of the customer journey? So that's the first thing. Are you operating with it as your framework?
Okay.
The second thing is the reporting that you're using to measure your ongoing efforts, does it help you measure those efforts and monitor those in terms of the customer journey? So does the data help you have discussions, strategic discussions that match the way that the way that you want to be describing those campaigns in the customer journey? Do you have data that shows you, that gives you the capability to talk about effectiveness of those campaigns that matches? Are you measuring aware users? Are you measuring considering users? Are you measuring intent to purchase users?
And if the answer to that is yes, you'd be able to see a report that gives you that says to you, this is how many people, based on your definitions, are in the consideration phase.
Yeah.
This is how many people are aware. Yeah. Here's our cost per
user generated.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you're able to start measuring themed content. Like you roll out a campaign, then you go, well, the intent of this campaign is to get people to consider our product versus other products. It's a comparison kind of piece. And now you actually have the tool to be able to decide whether or not what you wrote or produced is effective at moving people from generally aware of what you do to specifically aware of what your product is. And you can now say whether or not that content was effective because you're seeing it in your reports based on its ability to move people through.
Yep.
What are the skills and proficiencies a team would need to have today, right now, in order to design and deploy a successful practice for doing customer journey analytics?
So this is the same thing as the folks that we have on our staff. So we have analytics architects that do solution and system design. We have data collection engineers that work in collecting data on the web and in apps. We have data engineers that are responsible for extracting data from data systems and joining it and building data sets for machines or reports. And then we have visualization engineers that are responsible for building out reporting. So that's kind of the stack of an analytics program.
Okay, and so if I don't have those skills in-house, it might be worth looking into a specialized team to help me do this.
That's come have a conversation. Let's talk about filling gaps.
Okay, so it sounds like the best way to get a successful customer journey analytics program deployed is